This is part 2 of What is a Perception of Information Security? Welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, Chris Maddalena and I will continue our discussion of what is perception of information security. I think you're absolutely right. I agree with you totally. I don't think security is an IT position, and I think I've even been. A lot of us come up through IT too. You got the hacker culture, which is very technical type of thing. So that's going to be a hard tie to sever. But I think we should at some point be moving more towards a guiding factor, because security should be within every role. I mean, even within the business function, because they've got to pay attention to, like you said, the phishing emails. Because, one person clicks on a phishing email, that entire agency, organization could be owned by that one person if there's certain things in place. So I think security is something that is going to be a mindset that a lot of other departments are going to have to take part in. I mean, developers, for example, need to be writing, that's one of the problems right now, is writing secure code at the outset, at the beginning of the SDLC process. So security, we need to be at the early stages of the SDLC process. So I'm very much in agreement with you on that.
Yeah, one of kind of think of the SDLC process. One of the kind of anecdotes that I've told people. I don't think people really believe me how true this is, though. My wife is a web developer, and so I know tons of her people that she works with that are all web developers, and they came to me one day because they were all kind of stressed out because they had a pen test coming up, and they weren't stressed out because of that, but it was because the last time they had a pen test, whoever had done it brought down their network. It sounded like that it wasn't it was poorly executed, or they told them just go crazy or something. Right. But oh yeah, so we had to get this done, and this had to be checked in. We had to do all this, cram in as much work as we could so they could do this over the weekend. And I said, oh cool. I said, do you know what they're going to do? And they were like, no, I don't know. That's the security team. The security team set it up. I said, but you don't know what they're going to do? And they're like, no. What do you mean? I was like, they're testing your stuff. You don't know what they're going to do? And so I sat them down. I showed my wife, showed her Burp Suite, and I pulled up Shodan and just kind of went through and showed her basically just simple open source intelligence and some of the tools, and showed her what in 30 minutes I could pull up on her company and on some of the apps that her team works on that were externally facing, or could be accessed from the outside for whatever reason. And she was kind of surprised at what I was able to do with it. And I said, yeah, this is roughly what they're going to be doing, over the weekend.
Right.
And, then a couple weeks later, she comes and she's like, yeah, we got the report from the pen test. I said, okay, cool. I said, anything interesting? She's like, I don't know. I said, well, what do you mean you don't know? And she was like, well, we each got 3 pages of paper, stapled together, that was just on our desk Monday morning, that had a list of, it was just, I didn't see it, but it was just a list of vulnerabilities. I don't know, this is one of cross-site scripting, on this app, where it was found, and then next vulnerability, and she's like, I don't know, it was worthless.
Was that from the pen test team?
So my assumption is that the security team probably got a big report. They handed it off to the development, her manager, who took a piece of it, for the team. Eventually got
right.
Narrowed down to these 3 pages that they printed off and gave to each one of them. Right. But I was so you're going to fix them? And she's like, no, we don't have time for that. No one's giving us time. No, and also we don't understand them. Right. I don't know what this is. And I said, well, did you try to Google it? And she's like, I don't have time to sit there and Google what this report means. And I was like, man, that is I don't know who failed. Maybe the report was awesome. So I don't know who did it anyway. So I can't really be down on the pen testers. I was like, but man, what a failure! What a total missed opportunity. That's whether it was the pen test team that did a bad job, or a management failure that report wasn't disseminated properly. But so those probably aren't going to be fixed, or they'll be fixed later. Because the people that needed to do the actual work had no understanding, didn't receive an explanation as to why it was relevant, and why any of it mattered, or what the implications were.
Well,
And that was a lot of it where, they didn't even understand, like, well, what can you even do with this? Like,
well, so your wife's company has like a security team.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I think, where the failure is, and that's where security gets a bad reputation, is the fact that security team, we should be, we're talking about being the guiding factor here. We should be interpreting the results and going, okay, this is, and if they don't have a good understanding of web application security, but if they don't, that's an area they've got to start pulling up Google and doing it. And I don't have a great understanding of application security. I've worked a lot with it in the last year and a half, but I will go sit down with the developers and let's go figure this out together. And that's kind of like the approach that I take with a lot of different things. So, and I think and we talked about this pregame too, is that just there's a lot of lack of mentorship within the security space. And I think security can be a very friendly face. I've been to the security conferences. Everyone's great. Everyone's friendly. We can be friendly with, and we can take that friendliness and be friendly with other departments. And, because like you said, everyone else is under pressure to get the job done, and the developers have a timeline to get stuff done and get everything. But all that also again has to come from support from the top as well. So management has to go, wait, my people don't understand this. You got to help us understand this so we can go fix these problems. And there's a little bit of it might sound like there's maybe a little bit of accountability thing there. So they may have just had a pen test to check off a box, which is just a whole nother podcast in itself.
Yeah, that's. There's many roads to go down with that one anecdote of, because the other thing too is not to pick on them too much, but like that security team, I don't even know if if they have a SOC, are they actually like a security team, or are they the people tasked with security that are part of IT, which could be a big difference, because and this is also the reason that we don't often get into of why don't we want to be considered IT. It's not really like we don't want to be part of your group. It's really more the fact that I can't be managing systems and like imaging new computers or doing all that while also handling security, because then I would be way too busy to try to guide anyone or explain things.
I think a lot of people are struggling with that. I know I've struggled that with my job. I've had to run the antivirus server, and I've had to run I've had to fill out website requests because it has it sort of has a security lane, so it falls, because we block web ads and some other things in it, and it helps with doing some kind of incident response type of things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think security is still very much maturing.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right there. That and actually just that made me think of the thing that I think a lot about is, and I try to stress this when I'm talking with clients and also just even internally at my company, is when we're looking at doing a vulnerability assessment, one of the things that we try to call out is process failures. And this is something that I got from, I forget his name. I saw a presentation he gave. It was one of the auditors at Trusted Sec. They talked a lot in this one presentation I saw about the idea of a process failure, and that really stuck with me because he lumped in. He's like, well, if you have a misconfigured device or a default password, or it's like a really bad password, something that you look at it, and if you were doing a penetration test, you get that, and you're like, I'm in, done, and then you proceed to do like post exploitation. And you kind of wrap things up in record time. He said, he's like, well, those are process failures, because something in that organization said that was okay to implement that with default settings. Put that out there with the default password or use this bad password. And one of the things that we want to do is obviously, from the red team side, and I think some people get caught up in the idea of like kind of the glory of like, I want to be like a hacker from the movies. I'm going to break into things. And so they're perfectly happy to take those easy roads when they open up. But really, it's almost like the pen test becomes so much less valuable when when that's one of your roads in, because you're not testing a mature program. You're testing a very much an immature program because there's a broken process somewhere, or they're not doing regular assessments. If maybe they changed that process, but no one ever went back and made sure that the existing hardware was set up properly. So really, you want to call that out and say, hey, and again, be that guiding force, not say, oh, you have a vulnerability here. Say, hey, we noticed that there is a default password. That's what let us get in. And why don't you go fix that? And don't do, and calling it out as a process failure and letting them know how to fix it. That, hey, get a process in place to do something so that these passwords don't get don't go into the environment unchanged, or make sure you're always setting these devices up properly. And then say, okay, then come back to us and let's do it again, and we'll see if we can find another way in. Because we always want to be testing a mature program. Because if we're just testing, an immature program, then the next time we come in, they might have just changed that password, but then they put in a new router or whatever, and then you find the same problem because they just did the tactical response of change the passwords,
right?
Update the settings, and then they checked off the boxes in your report, said, okay, I did it. And then a year later, they call you back to do another pen test, and you find a similar way in because they replaced something and didn't have that updated process in place. And that's definitely where I can see a guiding force coming into play,
right,
of explaining to them what should be changed and why it would be a good idea to do so.
So I think we've covered the perception within the business pretty well. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't already discussed?
Oh man, I was just trying to go through everything we've talked about.
It's a little bit difficult.
We've kind of covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. That's fine. I mean, there's also the perception out in the real world with like all the TV shows and stuff that we could talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm really and that's kind of what I expected we'd talk about. But we've kind of talked about more about the business, and I think that's good as well, because it's a lot. I think that's a lot of where. Obviously, that's where a lot of us work, but that's where a lot of us need to start making some strides and changing the perception of security. And I think there's some interesting ideas here because I've never thought about that. I've thought about the guiding factor, but I have also always thought about security as kind of like an IT role, but that's because I've come up through IT. But it's not, if you do think about it, like you said, it's not like you have an understanding of all that, but really it's not IT, because it's just telling people how processes should be done and how things should be configured.
Yeah, definitely. It's and kind of to speak to kind of out there in the real world though, is that there are some of what we talked about does affect that as well. Like one of the big ones, and we saw that a lot with the Jeep hacking this past week, because that's going on like kind of right now while we're recording this. I guess just to quickly go over that, if it's been forgotten by the time this goes up, is a couple of security researchers found a vulnerability in the latest, I think the Jeep Cherokee, and it basically allows them to take remote control over the car and cause a bunch of problems. And it made a really big splash this past week because, and I take a little bit of umbrage with how the security researchers did it.
I'm with you.
Yeah, they've been on Twitter going like, "See, look, we can get press for our." Like one of them was out there saying on Twitter, like, "See, we can get press without having like a goofy logo and a crazy name for our vulnerability." And I wanted to be like, "Oh yeah, but you did this huge sensationalist like article with Wired." Like,
right. Well, and now they're the story, and the question is, security research, and that's a whole nother podcast. But they've kind of inserted themselves into the story. It's not a story about Jeep hacking. It's kind of also it's a story about that, but it's also a story about what's the proper way to do some of this research in a safe manner, not shut down the car on a highway with a journalist in it.
Yeah, which is so to kind of briefly touching, like you said, that could be a whole like hour-long conversation at least, is a lot of people, and Ben 10 had a really good blog post about this where he had a couple of examples of tweets that some people reported as like, security researchers disable Jeep. Like, okay, that's interesting, but that's not a very snappy headline. So some people ran with like hackers, take control over a Jeep. And it's still accurate, right? We didn't really change, but to the outside world, a hacker is always a bad guy. Like, people don't really identify hackers as being good or bad unless because if you think about it, anytime you've probably had a conversation where you referred to like a good hacker, at some point you went, there's good and bad ones, okay? And then you so we refer to ourselves as hackers. We a lot of the conferences say like hacker convention, like as a subtitle to it. And that's fine because it tells the community what it is. But to the outside world, it's still like that becomes very ambiguous or a little bit scary. So to say like hackers take control over a Jeep, that sounds very malicious. It doesn't sound like there's some research from these two security researchers that allowed them to do this. So it becomes kind of a lie to say hackers did it because you're playing on the idea that the reader thinks like bad criminal did something to someone's car.
Right.
And so that definitely I think is a big hurdle for us to overcome, because I don't think we're going to let go of the word hacker because it has a lot of flavor. We really like it. It's been sort of with that industry, with the industry for a long time. There's plenty of people that consider themselves hackers. You don't have to even be in security for it, right? It's not a security specific role.
Right.
Just
MacGyver's a hacker.
Yeah. You're curious. You're cobbling things together. You're screwing around with things. You're a hacker.
Solving problems. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's fun. People take pride in being a hacker, and they should. But yeah, it's with how it's used in the media. We have to be careful, I think, with how it gets used, kind of outside of like the conferences, because it can really color the impression of, when you're trying to be that guiding force to say like, to start using words like that, kind of go back to, you need to know your audience. So if you are you're throwing out words like that and you're talking to the wrong people, or your article is going up in front of a certain audience, it's going to color the perception of that. Right.
Absolutely. Yep. And I keep thinking about hacker almost because it is sensationalized, but it's also to me it almost has like a horror movie type of connotation. People, a bad guy hacking up some teenagers or something.
It's the full blown hoodie. And
that's going to be
three laptops in the back of a van
with a mask and some gloves on that you really probably couldn't type with. But absolutely. Losing the hacker. And I know a lot of people want to hold on to the name hacker, and I think that's admirable. I think, though, at some point we are going to have to also accept the fact that we are information security professionals, and that just sounds more professional within that space. And if we start switching to that, it's going to kind of help with the perception a little bit. So
and to that point, though, is that with how hacker has been kind of taken on this life of its own, and it's kind of difficult for us to use it and be taken seriously or not have that, miscolored perception. That's to go back to the Jeep hacking and then, earlier this year with Chris Roberts and the planes and all that. It's like, I've talked to Chris Roberts. I think he's an awesome guy.
Yeah. He's fantastic. Yeah,
he's cool. And I don't really, and he has owned like what he said on Twitter. It was a mistake. Shouldn't have said it. It caused, he definitely did not mean for it to be like taken so seriously.
And there's
spread like that.
Yeah, there's a perception issue right there. Yeah.
Yes, but so now, also to at B-Sides Destroy, Mark Stanislav for Rapid 7 gave the keynote that Saturday, and one of the things he mentioned that there's a lot that he says in that keynote. Actually, if you have heard it, that is controversial and is definitely very much his opinion. But one of the things that I took away from it was, he went before, I want to say it was Congress, the week after kind of all of that blew up, and he was seeking exemption from the DMCA for security researchers. And while Chris Roberts never meant any harm with what he was saying on Twitter, and it probably shouldn't have affected Mark. One of the questions Mark says he got, like, first thing was, why should we trust security researchers and exempt them from the DMCA when they're doing that?
Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, you know what? Fair question. Touche. And then you see the thing with the Jeep, and whether or not, I'm still kind of unclear of exactly what went on with the Jeep hacking, with the highway, and some of it was done in the parking lots, and some of it was on a high.
All of that could have been done in a parking lot, to be honest. But
yeah, all of it probably should have been. Yeah, it's or a test track of some kind, and so now they're getting a lot of. I don't know. I actually don't know because I haven't read. I've been trying to read the articles, but I haven't read all of them yet, or all the ones I have like bookmarked. But they're getting, they're getting kind of like, look what these guys are crazy. They endangered lives, and so now it's again if we keep this up, eventually security researcher will be like, oh, you're a security researcher. Do you do research or do you screw around with planes and Jeeps on highways?
Right.
Like if we want to do something that's perhaps in a gray area, maybe let's move away from moving vehicles in the in the sky or on highways.
Absolutely.
If we could just move away from that for a few months.
Well, and I think that's something that is just going to have to mature within the security industry, is that we're going to have to that perception and kind of define standards. So you can kind of define the difference between security researcher and the term stunt hacking. Which stunt hacking has its uses in making an impact, but the impact here is that it's they're starting to be drawn into being part of the story. The good thing that they did have was that there's a recall now for Chrysler.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's very much positive, and that's something I think they can be proud of. But now they're having to also, instead of being able to get back to their security research, they're having to combat the PR and some of that stuff of the kind of the moral of doing that article or putting that journalist on the highway and having some of the other stuff going on. So I think what we've done is good, and sometimes it requires that, but we also need to keep in mind that we are professionals, and we need to be conscious of our perception.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that earlier point we talked about. It's a really easy motivator, using fear, and who knows if they had. I want to say they were reporting it to Fiat / Chrysler.
I think so. Yeah,
and weren't getting the traction that they wanted. I think I'd seen a couple of mentions that it was reported to them like 3 months before the car was to release for this year, which so it was like already going out to dealership. So they didn't want to do a recall. They do have a firmware update available for it, but in their contract they forced like the dealerships to charge $300 for that. So it's like, well, do you want your car to be vulnerable, or you can pay us $300 and we'll give you the new software? It's so this definitely had a much better response from Fiat. But yeah, there's that whole debate that we just kind of had on, was it a good way to go about it? I don't think so. But again, that's kind of been our fallback a lot, that I hope we can get away from, using fear to be like, look, or shame, fear and shame. That's kind of our big two. And they're very effective.
Yeah, information security is very much in its teenage stage right now. We're about to maybe head into college where we do some more. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we're already in the college stage. I honestly don't know. But yeah, I think it's just a maturity thing. So, and I think we can do a better job of trying to improve our perception, like everyone. So, because I think like you said, hacker is kind of like a recluse creature, but you go to these security conferences and they're absolutely great people. So
and that's the one thing I when I have, and also to be clear, like I love security researchers. I
we're not knocking them. Yeah,
white papers and stuff that they put out.
Yeah.
I understand like half of it, and then just kind of marvel at the might as well skip to the conclusion most of the time and be like, wow, that's okay. I understand what you're telling me. I don't understand how you found it, but yeah, it's I guess I wish there was a way that they could tell, in that perfect world where they could just tell someone something's wrong and it just gets fixed. But
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's and the other thing too with the security conference, like you've mentioned, that there's the people at the conferences are awesome, and I know that that if they could get in front of people and present it, present things like they present at the security conferences in that same way, in that friendly way, that we could probably gain some traction. Where right now we struggle. But the other thing we have to remember too is that there's that kind of vicious cycle where the security people look at like the IT people or the and they go, stupid developers always making the same mistakes in their web apps. And then the developers look at like stupid IT people can't keep my server up. The IT people say stupid developers don't know how to write a service. Their server keeps going down. And there's just like this circle of everyone just thinks someone else is being stupid. And then everyone hates security because security is waving a stick at them. And the thing to remember is that we often get that perception from the security community is often we get defensive. Like, no, we're telling you the right way to do things. You should listen to us.
Yep.
But remember that the crew that you see at security conferences, the people that showed up to a security conference and did some networking and saw some talks are like already leagues ahead of most of the security people that do nothing but they check in at 9 o'clock. They, wave their stick at some developers and then, check out at 5.
Yeah.
There are definitely people out there, just like there are honestly bad developers that are making the same mistakes when they know they shouldn't. And, people that are leaving all kinds of services open to the internet or, whatever, making those same mistakes that you find on pen tests and assessments. Those same people exist in security. So, no one is perfect. And so that's the other way we're out there guiding people, trying to spread our knowledge, and talk to people. We can also reach people, that aren't showing up at the conferences, security people that could, we kind of mentioned in the pregame where you talked about at the state level, you don't always get some of the best talent because the pay is not great or just with how the hiring is, the really good talent might end up at private companies. And that's totally fine because sometimes those people are great. They're, diamonds in the rough that you don't realize what their potential is because they've been stuck on the help desk for the last 8 years, but they really know their stuff. But everyone's going to make mistakes, and if no one's there to say, hey, no, this is wrong, do it this way, or at least have that debate with them so they can figure out what the right or wrong way to do something is, they'll just keep doing it their way forever until someone stops them.
Right. Yeah. So
they don't have anyone there to be a mentor,
Yeah, so I think our takeaway here is to be a guiding factor both within the community and with that and outside of it, with even with your family.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it. Hopefully you learned something. If you didn't, drop me a line on Twitter at TimothyDblock or email me at timothy.dblock@gmail.com and let me know what you didn't learn, and we'll try to cover that in a future podcast. I think we've got quite a few future podcasts out of this one. Something I hopefully plan to cover. Chris, go ahead and give the people your Twitter handle and anything else you'd like to plug.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at CMaddalena. That's just CMADDALENA. And I don't really have anything to plug. Just thanks for having me, Tim.
All right. Awesome. All right. That's going to be it. Have a good one.